Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Download. Today, I am joined once again by Alex. Alex, do you want to give us a quick hello? You're back after a little absence.
I had a little holiday last week, not from work, but from the podcast. And now I'm back and raring to go.
No, I mean, it's great to have you back. Luckily, we touched on little spoilers for the episode. No Ubisoft today. We touched on Ubisoft last week, and I thought we'd give you a break from Ubisoft. I feel like we're always bringing up the same topics, but this week there'll be no Ubisoft. But we are going to be taking...
That's what I'm here for. That's all my specialist subject.
Specialist subject on Mastermind. But yeah, today we've got a few really interesting stories. As per usual, we're going to be taking a look at the Google's announcement of Project Genie, which has sent some shockwaves through the industry, both with players and companies and the stock market as well. But that's something we're going to be taking a look at. We'll also be having a little look at Sony and Nintendo, who both have published financial results this week. And there's one really interesting trend with both of their results that we'll be having a little conversation about. And then our final big story today is Valve. So we're going to be looking at Valve. We're going to be looking at the upcoming Steam machine, but now it's not as upcoming as we originally thought. But we'll get into that later. And we'll be back in a second with our first story of the day. So we're going to start today's episode by taking a look at Project Genie. It is an AI tool from Google that is capable of generating interactive environments from text and images. And at the same time, we'll also be having a little look at Roblox, because they've also revealed their own AI-based game design tool this week. So, I know we've not spoken much on AI before, Alex, but I thought I'd treat you this week and we take a little look at AI. But yeah, this tool, Project Genie...
They really are letting this thing out the bottle. That's what I think it has to be acknowledged. And can they get it back in, which is always the worry.
No, that's true. I mean, we can dive straight into it. I think this is really interesting. I've seen... So this tool was... I think announced last Friday. It also got released, Project Genie, this is we're talking about, out of someone rubbed a lamp at Google and the Project Genie came out and this thing can generate playable, interactive 3D worlds in real time. One of the real limits, though, is the fact that these worlds exist for 60 seconds and then they kind of disappear back into the lamp, I guess, if we're going to continue the Genie analogy. But unlike traditional game engines, so Unreal, Unity, there's no pre-built maps, there's no pre-built code here. Essentially, the AI here dreams the world into existence as you move through it. So how I like to think of this is, to me, it is like when you have those really weird dreams and things just keep popping up in your head and you're just really confused and then you wake up with no idea what's going on. But this is real. It's not a dream. And I think it's, if this is successful, if this works, this will fundamentally change, how people can make games, how people can build games and how people interact with them. So this is huge.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very strange thing to think, because obviously it's going to generate something that kind of sits between a game and something that can be the author's intent can then be applied to on top of that. So lowering the barrier to entry for people that are thinking of making a game. But I do wonder what that experience ends up looking like in kind of the long run of somebody trying to make something more substantial. Obviously, it's very impressive when you take these small bites, because you don't start to see where the fractures appear. And obviously, this, as everyone says, this is the worst it's ever going to be. These things are only going to get better week on week on week, month on month, year on year. But where you end up with a lot of games is that, it's the small things that make them work. It's the impact, it's the feedback, it's all these things that are refined by a person based on their own opinion, feedback from other players, and all these elements. And if an AI starts generating that, are we going to end up in a place where all games end up feeling, all the games built in this engine, I should say, not all games, end up feeling alike as part
Very
of
similar.
that process?
Well, I mean, the fact that you've brought that up, one of the immediate issues which we've seen as soon as this tool came out is that immediately we're seeing people making so-called bootleg versions of Mario, of Zelda. And again, these aren't, as I always say, we always link the articles we're discussing in the description. Please go and check these out because you can see some of this footage. And when what we're seeing so far is that the idea of inspiration, we are bordering on that line to the point where there's clips that I've seen from Project Genie where people are entirely just taking the intro sequence to Zelda Breath of the Wild, and that's what this thing is spitting out, and it does raise the questions around copyright law, around the fact that if these tools are being trained on games that already exist, like you said, Alex, well, are they all going to end up looking the same? But more so, how do these tools break away from just essentially creating things that already do exist? How do they start building their own identity?
I mean, you do hear this kind of with everything. It's like it's about what you feed it. It's about the instructions you give it. And I'm sure there are ways to make it start, or for somebody that has a strong sense of how to create something, to drive it down a creative path that does differentiate it from other elements. I think part of what when I think of it kind of stands out to me is like when you're making a game, you're making the path that it goes down, right? So you know where the stress fractures lie, where the boundaries are to your creativity, essentially, and where, like, if you go beyond this, it's going to be broken. If there's all these things you have to take into account within your scope.
Well, they're such creative experiences, aren't they? Like I think of we're seeing it less during this generation, but the those hidden loading screens that were quite a big thing, and that was developers basically recognizing, hey, what we need 10 seconds here where we can deload this and then load this up. So what we're going to do is we're going to force the player into this specific situation. And I think that what you're saying is it's the artistic intent, isn't it? And if with how this engine supposedly works, if the world is being dreamed up as you interact with it, where is how do you ensure that there's artistic intent?
Yeah, it's like, but it's not just artistic intent, it's also the testing. Like, this thing's endless, it goes on forever because nobody's put a barrier in place to say, like, so like it comes onto the other side.
Are there any bugs to fix? Maybe.
Like, I don't know, I had nothing to do with everything beyond this very tight path. But I'm sure there'll be people that do something, and this will, somebody will do something incredible with it and unique, but maybe not replicable widely. And there have been AI engines kind of floating around for a while. It's just like a lot of them are just shooters with different backgrounds and different weapon feels, and you select those on your way in.
Well, despite
fascinating
I think
to see where it goes.
We're both obviously coming from
cynic,
that industry perspective of, not even cynics, but I think that understanding of more of how the industry works. I think what's interesting is that this announcement led to a real, I would say, a collapse in a lot of the value of a lot of video game stocks. So we're looking at Roblox, which is ironic with what we'll touch on in a moment, but we're looking at Roblox, Nintendo, Unity got hit, I think, with about 30%. They lost it in stock value within a few days. Take-Two have taken a big hit. Clearly from outside the industry, if we're looking at investors and investor confidence, this Project Genie has all of a sudden swayed a lot of confidence in, okay, if I guess the dream with all this is that within 10 years, if I want to play a game that's X, Y, and Z, I can go to this prompt and say, hey, do this for me. And from the outside, from that investor perspective, it seems that a lot of people now are seeing this and thinking, oh, well, Nintendo, 150 years of history. We don't need Mario anymore because we've got this. But I think mentioning Roblox, the irony there is that Roblox this week have also unveiled a generative AI tool, is the term that they've used, and that's what I'm going to stick with, that acts in a similar way to Project Genie, but at this point is less about worlds and environments and is more about generating functional objects from text prompts. I think the example they gave was, like making a car. But at this time, that tool isn't available for the public. So Project Genie is, but this Roblox tool at the moment, that's still in the research phase. And what you've said about the limits and things, is that a case of Roblox recognizing that right now we don't think this is ready? And I don't know if that's because Google isn't a video game company. Google is Google. Google does tech. Google does so many things, whereas Roblox is very much video games. So I don't know if that's, for Roblox, it's a case of we don't quite have the confidence in this to release it.
Possibly. I think Roblox also sits in a strange place where there's a lot of like storefronts, like, people are selling assets in there. And if you release that onto the market, you have a double-edged problem. One of which is like, if anybody can use it, there's going to be like, oh, make something like this. And they have an asset, like they've created something like that, undermining all those shops. But also you'd probably find the market flooded with things created by it. So in terms of them having a marketplace in store within the game, I think that's possibly part of what's limiting their kind of open.
It makes sense. It does make sense, doesn't it? And I guess the last thing that they want is for things to be appearing from this tool that have been stolen from stuff that other people have made. It's a novel idea, isn't it? I think we'll leave that one there and we'll wrap this story, and then we'll come back in a second by taking a look at the Steam machine. I would love if Valve had turned around and been like, hey guys, it might, we're not looking at Q1 now, we are looking at first half of the year. And then they're just like, first week of March, they're like,
there
it is.
Still first. We weren't lying.
We weren't lying.
Sorry, you had a question for me. I do realize.
Yeah, I was more a bit of a rhetorical one, but I was wondering if you'd like to guess why this. I was going to say why this delay has happened, but now with what you said, we're like, is there even going to be a delay?
Yeah, I would put it down to them wanting to. I think they want to pull a Nintendo and make sure they have enough machines to meet desire, so there aren't any scalpers or people driving the costs up.
That might be right. From Valve have said that the reason for this, again, delay, maybe it's a delay. I won't do that again. We'll stop doing that joke. But maybe when you're listening to this tomorrow, they'll already be available and they'll have pulled the rug on all of us. But Valve have said that this delay is caused because of the worldwide shortages and price spikes of RAM and SSD storage, which it feels like we haven't even been talking about this for that long, but at this point I'm kind of tired of having this conversation about the fact that, I mean, to put it into perspective, from the consumer side, we're seeing that, RAM and SSD prices have doubled, tripled, even quadrupled in some cases since around November. And of course, I don't believe that Valve are popping onto Amazon to buy RAM, but we're at the point now where we are starting to see, I think, manufacturers being affected by these shortages, and Valve are taking a step back, and maybe Valve are thinking, like you said, we need to make sure we've got enough stock. But actually, like Nintendo did with the US price of the Switch 2, different situation, but do we know how much do we want to sell this for? Because we have to make sure that we're still making a margin here, and we can't guarantee at this time that we know what that price is.
And it's already, all the rumors about it already put it higher than I think most people were hoping, ultimately. Because I think, it's a fixed box, and yes, it's probably about half the price of, in terms of performance, it's maybe half is probably overly generous, maybe 70, 80% of the cost a PC of a similar kind of power would be, and it's set up better for kind of playing in your living room, more accessible, fixed hardware, all the benefits that brings with it, all the reasons consoles were used to be, possibly still are, more popular as kind of a gaming platform. But if PC is where you play, do you want to be paying that much for a fixed machine that you can't upgrade, or putting in a bit more for a machine that's got a little bit of, what's it called when you're protecting yourself for the future? Redundancy.
I was going to say future proofing. I was like, well,
future proofing. There we go.
Proofing on the
yeah,
end.
a little bit of future proofing.
I think that's a really valid point, though, at what you've said about me. I think the appeal of this is the fact that it's potentially a bridge between, if someone's always played on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and now they're looking and thinking, oh, I want to get into the PC market. I want to be able to play games via PC. But if that,
hear about these Steam sales, I want those games
exactly.
For so much
they
less money.
Hear about, but the Steam sales aren't as good as they used to be. So, if that's a reason why, maybe they're still much better than consoles. But I remember with Steam sales where they used to have like the flash sales where it would be like 20 minutes and you'd have like the notifications to be like, oh my God, get to the Steam store right now. And they just don't do those anymore. But the value to me is this being a bridge. But if Valve are now being pushed to make this less affordable, well, that really isn't the case anymore. And I don't. This isn't necessarily Valve's fault. I don't.
Not at all.
I don't think Valve. I don't think have as much of a benefit to this idea that you can sell hardware at a small margin or a potential loss and make it up in other ways. I think to them, there's no point releasing this unless they are going to make money on it. It's not as if people don't have PCs that they can buy games via Steam on. So it does feel to me, well, if these prices are such a big issue for Valve, is it now going to be impossible for the Steam machine to launch at a price which does make it appealing to the people I think they want it to appeal to?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And they did that kind of, the specs of the machine is built off a survey where like 80% of players, this will be one, an upgrade, and two, play everything they want to.
The
bit that isn't mentioned in that
isn't
mentioned. Yeah. The bit that isn't mentioned in that is that means all those people already have a way to play. So they're trying to find the gap in between the two, because I suspect people are at least going to want it to be a little bit of an upgrade on what they are playing on.
I'm just seeing so many like orange box. They have to do so many, like what Nintendo did with the 3D, like the new 3DSs where they had like all the different plates you could get.
Yes.
I feel like that needs to be a thing here. Because to me, I do struggle to see, one of the other prompts that I wrote down for this section was the fact that if Valve are looking at this now and thinking, oh, hang on a second, this is a problem, what does that mean for everyone else? It is this idea of, not just affordable PC hardware, but there's the idea of affordable video games hardware going to become a thing of the past. And we are seeing PlayStation price. I know PlayStation have had a lot of sales at the end of last year, but the base units are going up in price. Xbox is going up in price. We've seen Nintendo, they've come out this week after their earnings and said, we're not doing it right now, but we're not going to rule out Switch 2 price rises. It's concerning, I think, for it. It really feels to me, I don't think people should be pressured into buying something, but it feels like there's kind of a feeling at the moment that if you're looking at something and you want to get it, you're probably going to have to do it sooner rather than later because it's just going to get more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, is this release date held up by we're waiting for the prices on these to drop and then down the line after production we're there? Or is like I don't see when it comes out if they're waiting for that. Like our consoles, is the Steam machine going to be constantly downwind of RAM prices and production? Everything involved. Are we constantly going to be down for that? Because it
feels like it, doesn't it? I think the fact that I really do think that because we've seen all the major hardware manufacturers in the video game space come out and essentially say this
Can't do
is
it.
a problem. I trust their minds a lot more than I trust ours in terms of looking ahead and forecasting, hey, this is going to be a problem. And but I think you're right. At some point, they kind of do have to pull the trigger and release this thing, because the longer they wait, and it's not to be too dramatic, but the longer they wait, the more the hardware's becoming less relevant, because month on month, year on year, as games become, I do think we're at a plateau now, but as games become more taxing and become more demanding, well, what might have been a great value proposition last year might not be in a year. So they
And
have to
especially on
release it at some
PC,
point.
where you end up in that kind of, it's like the Android of gaming, whereas the console is more like Apple, where it's definite steps. Whereas somebody's in AMD's got a better graphics card out this month, Nvidia the month after, and you're on this constant rolling thing. And obviously,
New processors
that's the
and
high end stuff, and like that's not really what this is meant to be. It's meant to sit somewhere in between. But yeah, you are constantly looking at what's the top end machine able to do, and that cost. Well, it's probably going up as well. It used to be like the top end was, it kind of capped, but it does lead to questions to when the sweet spot will be for this to come out, for both value to the user, cost for the user, and cost for Valve.
a tricky, a triforce of problems for Valve to navigate. And I mean, I've even heard rumors this week that Half-Life 3 is going to launch on this thing the day it comes out. So
That would be wild, and that would, but it will also be on PC. It's not like you need
well,
to.
yeah, I've just seen a few things of people being like, oh, I reckon they've delayed it because they're going to release a new Half-Life alongside it as well. But we'll see. But yeah, this obviously has big ramifications for Valve, but I think it has bigger ramifications for everyone else as well, for Nintendo, for Xbox, and for Sony. And we'll wrap there, because when we come back, we are going to be looking at not Xbox today, but we are going to take a little look at Nintendo and Sony and see how their holiday seasons went. And wrapping up today's lineup of stories, as we said just before we wrapped, we're going to take a quick look at Nintendo and Sony. We're going to look at some financial results, but in particular, and I think what's really interesting, is both companies having very similar holiday seasons. So we'll go all over the place from Sony to Nintendo, but to start, PS5, new numbers, they've now hit 92.1 million units sold worldwide since launch, but holiday 2025 sales decreased year on year. And in major markets like the UK, we're looking at a drop of about 12 to 20%. So quite a big margin, but we're looking at a fairly solid decline. And we're seeing something very similar with the alarm bells, to me, are in the fact that both have had weaker holidays in comparison to, in Sony's case, to the previous year, but in Nintendo's case, most interestingly, I think, such a big drop in comparison to the original Switch.
I think there's a couple of things at play there. Like, obviously it's a troubling kind of downturn. Like, can't sit here and pretend like there's all these reasons, but if I assume it's unit sales they're looking at when they're tracking it for a large part. And you've got to keep in mind that last year did see, price rises for the PlayStation, which I'm sure kind of fewer units might not mean less money being spent on them. I think it does
But
a bit.
That is true, but I think we have to consider the fact that Sony had some really aggressive sales. I mean, more Black Friday, but I think there was a lot of stuff coming into
that's what I was
the
going to say.
Christmas period.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I was going to lead to, because like if the holiday period, I don't know when I don't know where it begins and ends in that. Like if people were like, okay, we're going to wait for Black Friday, grab them all then because we need to buy these presents for everybody, but we can't miss Black Friday because these things have got more expensive. So that's where it's always interesting when you start tracking a single period like the holidays. So you're like, what the actual impact was either side of that. I'm sure if they had a good year, clearly it was made up for somewhere. So it might be that buyers are just having to be more savvy at the moment to cover that off. And the similar things go for Switch. Like oh, they didn't have the same increases that Switch did. Switch had a scarcity to it right the way through in that window. Like
100%.
Nintendo came out and they to their credit, they had enough to meet demand. So of
Well,
course, it was
I remember
huge.
with the original Switch, and it's still weird to me to say a Switch 1, the original Switch. It's so weird to me that we've got the Switch 2 at long last. But I do remember that I think when the Switch first came out, they were selling more copies of Breath of the Wild than they were actual Switches. Like the attach rate for Breath of the Wild was higher than the amount of systems available because there were so few. Whereas, as you said, to your credit, there's pretty much always been, I think the US had some issues at launch, but there's always been Switch 2s available. So maybe a lot of this decline is accounted for the fact that,
Everybody got one.
the holiday season for the original Switch, well, hallelujah, people could finally get them. Whereas with the Switch 2, people like us and day one, we were like, yep, we'll get that. And the pre-order process was fairly easy. And then those sales maybe they have dropped a little bit, but through the year, it's just been a case of, the hardcore players got them early, and then people were still able to pick them up as gifts for the holiday season ahead of time.
And then that's where that kind of expense side starts to kick in. I can't remember. Was the original Switch, like £280 at launch around that?
I think it was $300.
Okay, so yeah. It's more. It's £100-200 more.
Breaking news, everyone.
Breaking news. You
Switch 2 costs more.
You charge twice as much for something, and the sales are 35% lower. You're probably. I'm sure
it is true, and I think as well, and it's something that I know we've discussed of each other, in day-to-day conversations, is that I am very happy with the Switch 2. I am. I don't sit and have many complaints about it, but I think that the elephant in the room is that you look at the first year lineup in comparison to what the Switch launched with, and you can say, well, Breath of the Wild was available on the Wii U. No one bought that game on the Wii U. Okay, so it might as well have been a Switch exclusive. And in year one, you had... Okay, Alex did. Okay, we found the one person who brought Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. But you had Breath of the Wild, you had Mario, you had 3D Mario, you had probably nowadays, Nintendo's biggest two software series, and Mario Kart 8 brought over from the Wii U. That first year for the Switch was mega.
Also had all the Wii U games nobody had played because nobody bought a Wii U.
Nintendo has very much in the first year of the Switch 2 so far, I think, relied on, I don't want to get castigated for this, but a weaker first-party lineup in terms of original games, and they've very much really gone, if you want to go back and play some of these older games, they look great now, and that's not as much of a selling factor as 2017, a brand new hardware form, one of the my favorite Zelda game ever, 3D Mario, Splatoon, Mario Kart. So to me, it is perfectly understandable. I feel like the big games for the Switch 2 this holiday season were Mario Kart, which was the launch game, and then Pokemon.
Don't forget Donkey Kong.
Well, and Donkey Kong's great, but I think that was very much...
But it's Donkey Kong. It's not one of the ones, like, he's, let's be fair, a side character. I know he got some love, but...
We love Donkey Kong. But yeah, I think that's quite a big part of it. And I think, to be honest, it's a similar case with Sony. When you look at the first-party lineup at the end of last year for Sony, Ghost of Yotei, really great game. But to be honest, Sony had quite a weak period for software as well. And I think that GTA 6 comes out, because I think if you don't have a PS5 at this point, it feels like, well, you're kind of waiting for... That's something. The reason why I think a lot of people will upgrade is for GTA 6. And probably get PS5 Pros as well if they want to.
I heard similar things said by, industry analysts, like people are waiting for GTA. And when I say people, I mean the industry, the platform owners are waiting for it because that's going to give them the boost. And then actually which is probably what's going to delay the next generation, oddly. to some extent because of that as well. Uh,
But yeah, I think
we can,
that's that, isn't it? I think that, I've already seen a lot of alarmism from people being like, oh, especially in the Switch 2 case, like, oh no, it's gonna fail. No one wants to play this thing. And I'm like, let's not forget, again, it has broken records repeatedly for being the fastest selling hardware ever. I think Nintendo are going to be okay, but I think that we are going to keep seeing hardware sales struggle a little bit, just because, especially with the PlayStation side of things, we're 5, we're about to be 6 years into the generation at this point, and there's not that many more people that are going to, like we've said, apart from some of that GTA 6, the casual consumers of games there's no need to upgrade until something like that comes out. So I think this year we are, like you said, Alex, a lot of people are kind of just sat twiddling the thumbs until GTA 6 is close, and I imagine that we're going to see a headline at the same time next year that'll be like, oh, in comparison to last Christmas, Sony has had an amazing couple of months, and they've sold so many systems, and it'll be, well, yeah, it's because GTA 6 has come out. So,
and GTA 6.
and maybe Nintendo will have the same if they somehow manage to cram that onto a Nintendo Switch. They'll really have to cram it on, try to squeeze the cartridge shut.
It's a nice idea. It's a nice idea, but yeah, I don't think so.
I'd love to see it. But no, we'll wrap up there, and when we come back, we'll take a look at a few stories for the rapid rundown before we finish for today. And we are back. Time for this week's Rapid Rundown. We've got 3 stories to quickly take a look at this week. The first of which is, I feel like we've seen a lot of indie publishers popping up in the last couple of months, which is great. But we've got Pixel Doors, who have announced their presence this week. I think what was really interesting with this is that they're launching with what they're dubbing a developer-first mindset, which essentially means that they'll only start taking a cut after their partners, so the developers in this case, have secured a financial footing. So that's a bit vague, but it appears that they're trying to combat some of the more predatory publisher practices that we see sometimes.
Yeah, and I haven't read the article, and I've got no idea of what the agreements look like.
Alex, I thought you were in the room, Alex. I thought you were in the room when the...
No, afraid not. I'm not in the room where it happened on this one, or any of them. But it's really good to hear the idea of like whatever, but what I think it was secured financial footing is the terminology used. That's, like you say, that's quite broad. Developers, I don't know how much they're giving to help them finish the game. I don't know if they then recoup that cost before the financial footing or after the financial footing. But also, I imagine that means they're going to be taking bets, and we see this increasingly, on games that have proven their popularity already. It's not going to remove like the idea that, you have to have a community, you have to have a certain number of wish lists before you step out.
Yeah, they're not going to be going out there giving stuff to anyone. But I think what is really interesting, and it's nice when there's a BGM, a big games machine connection, is that their first game that they're going to be helping and bringing to release is Mad King Redemption, and this is a project which we worked with the developers at the end of last year, and I know this is one that you were really hot on, Alex. So it's nice to see.
I saw it at an event and chased them and pestered them and told them they need to do something with PR if they're going to put out a demo. I made a pain of myself, but they listened and they got some.
Well, it's worked.
A beautiful looking game. It's a roguelike golden axe, and if you're listening to this and that sounds like it's up your street, I think the demo is still out on Steam and it's fantastic.
Yeah, and like I know I always say this on Like a Broken Record, links for these articles will be in the description, so you can go and have a look yourself. Now, on the topic, we're going to move away from roguelikes and the idea of cool indies to apparently everyone on consoles, their favorite games, which is sports games. And a new Newzoo report, which is a funny few words to say very quickly, but this report from Newzoo looking at the best-selling console games of last year, and 5 of the top 10 feels inevitable at this point, but 5 of the top 10 were annual sports releases. And I said to you before we recorded, Alex, it makes me laugh because all I see in those communities is people moaning about how terrible these games are, how they never change, how the monetization sucks. But time and time again, we are seeing that consoles and sports games do just go hand in hand. And if anyone ever asks, oh, why don't they do a fortnight and just become this live service hub where it's the same game and then it just changes every year? This is why. Because they can operate with very free-to-play-esque models and still charge you an entry ticket, and people pay.
Absolutely. And I think this year it's only going to be helped by the fact Call of Duty was not number 1 and dominating that. It slid down the chart, which obviously has only left more room at the top,
more opportunity
for those things to
and
slide.
That's all we'll get on this from Alex, because Alex has a real dislike for any sports games.
I was actually, if you saw me there, I was checking what I thought was a quote from an EA executive, but apparently it's kind of apocryphal. It's an urban legend, but basically it went like the statement was back in 1995. Will somebody buy FIFA again a year later? It's exactly the same game, said one EA executive once ever. Because the annualization of sports franchises.
It's the best.
Driving a lot of money in this industry.
Yeah, again, I don't want to stay on these stories for too long just because of how we like to, run through them quickly. But yeah, it's a formula which does work, and that. As I introduced this with, there is the irony in the fact that these communities are very vocal about the fact that they dislike these models. I look at FIFA Ultimate Team, which for years had its fingers grasped around me, and it is very addictive. And it's understandable why these sports releases work the way they do, because they're able to generate so much income. And they can just give you a new game every year. You start from 0, and then the same players come back the year after and keep.
I think more important, like if you're into it, if you're into football, who is playing for each club and their kits is important. And yes, they could.
There's no other game that you can.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is where you get the experience of what you're watching on TV every week, and you can play it. Makes absolute sense. Yes, they could do it as an update, but they don't. This is the way they do it, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, they'll look at this data and be like, "Yeah, there we go. That's why we don't do that."
Right.
And now we'll take a breath and go on to our last story, which is about Iron Lung, the video, not the video game, on the film based on the video game, being led and produced by very famous internet personality from, I feel like, the real early days of YouTube, which is Markiplier. But a real great success story, in the numbers will be different now, but from its opening weekend, it's managed to generate 17.8 million. And its production budget was about $3 million. So seems to have been a really great success. I definitely think this, in the same way that the FNAF films, I imagine this will be quite front-loaded, but it's great to see that an indie film based on a really weird indie game that I do remember playing, and then when the film got announced, I was like, how do you even turn this into a film? But by all accounts, it's managed to have a lot of interest, and it's done well, and I think it's a good sign that if you get things right and it's not too expensive, there's definitely scope for more of these kind of films. And obviously people will say, well, you look at the person who's involved in it, so that's why people went to go see it. But
and it came out just a week after Silent Hill, Return to Silent Hill, which, if you're going to go and watch one horror movie based on a video game, I don't have to see Iron Lung to know I would recommend Iron Lung, because I have seen Silent Hill.
Get that on the movie poster. Haven't even seen it, but I'd recommend it over Silent Hill. That was terrible.
Yeah.
the rapid rundown couldn't possibly be rapid this week if I asked you your thoughts on the Silent Hill film. So I think we'll don't go see it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I have a
Don't go
lot
see it.
to say about it. That's a whole other show. We'll do,
As a
we need to do a
bonus
video game
edition.
movie spin-off show one week. I'm down
I'll
for
do a
that.
tier list of the best and worst video games. But
Yeah.
anyway, then that could be controversial. Though I imagine there'll be some controversial takes there.
Nope,
but
I'm right.
You're right. You're completely.
There are very
right.
few things in the world that I am this confident on, but knowing which video game movies are good and
This
which are
film
bad, I know I'm right.
sucks.
There need to be two. They need to be how much I like them and how good they are. I think those are two different scales. But
It's one and the same to me. But anyway, that's a wrap for this week. I'm gonna do the director's board and cut. We'll cut there to stop Alex talking about the Silent Hill movie, which
not what those boards are for, but okay.
But I thought they were like action, but we can have like
it's to sync up the visuals with the audio because you get the clap of the sound.
Well, you know what? This is a video game news podcast. It's not a film podcast, so I don't need to know those things.
That's true.
But you need to know all the latest news. So I appreciate you all for tuning in to today's episode of the Weekly Download. And if you want to keep learning the news, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything. Be sure to subscribe. And if you'd rather read your news, if you prefer to sit and have a coffee and have a read in the morning, be sure to subscribe to our Weekly Download newsletter available via LinkedIn. And if you're even more interested in getting even more news, every day, Monday to Friday, we have our daily download of all the biggest stories from the industry. You get so many stories. I think you get 7 stories now every day, sometimes 8. So you get a lot in there. You also get the latest events, links so you can know everything that's going on. So you get a lot of great stuff there. And we'll be back next week with more stories and trends. And who knows, maybe we might even talk about Ubisoft again next week after an absence this week. Maybe.
And maybe the quick hit section will be quick.
But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.